The darkness still draped over the treetops outside Lebanon as Russian T-72B3 tanks, BMP-2 infantry fighting vehicles, and URL supply trucks thundered toward the city. Above them, Mi-8 helicopters prowled through the early sky. This was supposed to be a simple tactical maneuver, a clean flank around Sumy to punch into Kiev's western doorway. Yet at 5:14 a.m., just past the bend near Vasilieva, a silent shape hovered overhead, a Punisher UAV. It locked on. Seconds later, the fire control computers of M777 howitzers pulsed crimson. No one on that road realized they had just crossed the invisible line into a war zone. Before we dive into this battle, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe so you'll be the first to get the latest war updates. If you haven't seen the previous video explaining how the Ukrainian Punisher UAV first detected the Russian convoy near Lebanon, go back and watch it. It sets the stage for everything that follows. Without that moment, the collapse of this advance would seem impossible. On the surface, the Russian column looked perfect. A seamless line of T-272B3 tanks led the charge, flanked by BMP-22 infantry fighting vehicles, while Ural trucks carrying fuel and ammunition followed, like arteries pumping lifeblood through a war machine. Above Mi-8 helicopters floated in overlapping orbits. It was an image straight out of a field manual on maneuver warfare. Layered, armored, supported. It should have worked. But what no manual prepares for is what happens when the battlefield itself turns invisible. The first artillery strike didn't hit a tank. It didn't need to. It struck the road and a fuel truck. A calculated punch, not a random blow. Two M777 howitzers, hidden behind tree lines far to the west, fired GPS-guided shells with surgical precision. Flames erupted, fuel drained, engines stopped humming, and that's when the second phase began. Ukraine's LEA-1000 drones orbited silently above the treetops, watching the Russian line stretch, buckle, then slow to a crawl. Everything was still intact, but nothing was synchronized. That's when the bleeding starts in a mechanized advance. Stugna P anti-tank teams began moving into position. Some emerged from culverts beneath the highway, others from the top floors of abandoned houses. Their targets were deliberate, not the tanks, but the glue. Bridge layers, recovery vehicles, mobile radars, field command trucks. Disrupt those. And the spear breaks behind the tip. Each missile created a void. Each void created confusion. Some Russian vehicles turned inward to support, others reversed. And by then, the entire formation had become tangled. Mi-8 helicopters tried to suppress these ambushes, but Stinger teams positioned near water towers and tree lines had already set their trap. A missile hit its mark, and one MiJ spiraled into the fields, vanishing behind smoke and flame. By the time Ukrainian FPV drones began buzzing over rooftops, the column was no longer moving. It was folding. Radio traffic dissolved into cross-chatter. Vehicles without fuel were towed into ditches. T-372 seconds turned their turrets, unsure which direction was the threat. Momentum, once a weapon, had become a liability. What had started as a smooth armored thrust toward Kyiv was now a steel serpent biting its own tail, trapped, disoriented, and hunted. With the Russian column fractured and confused, Ukraine shifted tactics. They no longer aimed to stop the advance. They aimed to dismantle it one support vehicle at a time. The battleground wasn't a highway anymore. It was a kill zone engineered with chilling precision. From the Triine near Lebanon, a team of Ukrainian engineers deployed hidden TM-62 anti-tank mines along narrow escape routes. Meanwhile, a network of FPV drones launched from repurposed sheds began patrolling the flanks. These weren't reconnaissance drones. These were guided projectiles carrying shaped charges, scanning for thermal signatures, and diving straight into the exposed rear of fuel trucks and mobile HQ vans. Ukrainian infantry units equipped with Atlas tablets and Starlink-linked comms coordinated in real time with artillery teams. Every ping from a LEA-100 drone translated into a precise M777 or 2S1 Vastica strike, usually not on the tanks but on recovery vehicles, ammo carriers, or mobile kitchens. The goal was clear: starve the spearhead, blind its eyes, silence its radios. Russian soldiers tried to adapt. They deployed a few LRA-3 electronic warfare trucks to jam drone signals. But the signals Ukraine used were agile hopping frequencies masked by civilian interference and relayed through backup routers. One Lear 3 unit was destroyed by a loitering munition before it could even switch on. Even attempts to reorganize fell apart. A T-372B3 tried towing a disabled BMP-2 out of a blast zone only for both to be struck by a war-made drone minutes later. Fires burned along the road. The convoy, once a machine, was now a scrapyard. This wasn't just an ambush, it was system-wide sabotage. A battlefield where every dependency, fuel, comms, repair was methodically severed. But what came next was worse. Because Ukraine wasn't finished, not even close. In the next video, you'll see how Special Forces teams entered the fight, using urban terrain and underground infrastructure to carve the Russian column apart from the inside. Lebanon was never meant to be a battlefield until it became one. What looked like a quiet city was in reality a labyrinth constructed to break armor, morale, and momentum. As Russian vehicles entered the outer districts, their formations had already frayed. Now the terrain would finish what the drones had started. Streets twisted sharply between old Soviet apartment blocks. Courtyards turned into perfect trap zones. Ukrainian engineers had mapped every angle, building an invisible web. Anti-tank mines TM-62 lay buried at intersections. Improvised explosive devices disguised in garbage bins exploded under lead vehicles. The first BMP to make the turn past Shevchenko Street hit a charge and rolled. The T-372 seconds behind it hesitated. That pause was fatal. From above, FPV drones dropped from rooftops like mechanical hawks, diving into rear armor. One struck a mobile command vehicle, causing secondary detonations. On the ground, infantry teams moved like shadows. They didn't fire from the same place twice. RPGs launched from windows. Javelins fired from stairwells. Stuggan missiles streaked from behind broken fences. Every corner fired back. The Russian response came too slowly. Med-8 helicopters circled, but the streets offered no clean shot. The buildings, once just concrete and dust, now served as camouflage and fortress. Ukrainian fighters jammed radio signals using Buell AD, blinding Russian recon teams, and even disrupting targeting data for air support. Worse, the city absorbed sound. Gunfire echoed in all directions. Russian units couldn't tell where the next shot would come from. Some dismounted only to fall into fire zones. Others retreated, blocked by wreckage. The once proud column had become a traffic jam of steel, fire, and confusion. Lebanon didn't meet the Russian assault with numbers. It met it with design. It wasn't a front line, it was a meat grinder set on slow rotation. And just when the Russians thought they had seen the worst, something began moving beneath their feet. Please like if you like this video, comment 1 to support Ukraine, 2 if you love peace and hate war, and 3 if you don't like this news. Lebanon's underground was no longer just infrastructure, it was a hunting ground. Beneath the shattered roads and burning armor, Ukrainian special forces moved like smoke through storm drains, maintenance tunnels, and foundation shafts. Their mission was ruthless. Don't destroy the tanks. Cut off what keeps them moving. The first targets were mobile fuel depots hidden behind civilian structures. Small teams crept in with suppressed carbines and demolition charges, disabling pumps and piercing barrels. Tanks above still looked intact, but inside their cockpits, fuel indicators began to blink red. Moments later, those tanks were nothing more than 45-ton tombs. Communications were next. Command vans, satellite routers, and field relays were sabotaged one by one. Ukrainian operators planted magnetic charges on antennas, smashed transmitters, and vanished into utility corridors. What wasn't destroyed was blinded by electronic warfare. Buell AD and Pol 21 systems spread across basement bunkers, jammed radio and drone signals in overlapping waves. Above, Russian crews grew increasingly isolated. FPV drones soared along the rooftops, dropping grenades onto maintenance crews, slamming into ammo trucks and harassing soldiers trying to dig in. Repair was nearly impossible. Convoys were disrupted not by direct fire, but by absence. No fuel, no parts, no orders. To maintain constant pressure, Ukrainian artillery batteries rotated like clockwork. M7 787s, 2 S-1 Gavostikas, and mortars fired rapid bursts from concealed positions, then vanished before counter-battery radar could lock on. Every 2 minutes, a new detonation, just enough to keep the Russians panicking, never enough to give them a clear target. Russian resupply attempts only made things worse. New trucks rolled into routes already mapped and booby-trapped. FPV drones pounced on them before they could even offload supplies. Some units tried side roads only to be funneled into cul-de-sacs blocked with rubble and scrap placed with surgical intent. Infantry tried to establish perimeters, stacking sandbags and posting machine guns at intersections, but there were no frontal assaults to repel. Ukraine didn't charge. It tightened slowly, quietly, relentlessly. And deep inside those stalled columns, Russian crew sat idle, waiting for commands that never came, fuel that never arrived, air support that never showed. Radio static was their only answer. Smoke filled their lungs, batteries drained. The illusion of strength withered. Lebanon wasn't in a fight. It was a siege from within. The western districts of Moscow, once a transit route for reinforcements, had turned into a no-exit battlefield. Russian armored columns advancing toward the city center were now caught in a net of concrete silence and electronic chaos. GPS failed. Radios collapsed into static. Mapping systems looped aimlessly. Russian tanks circled the same blocks blind and isolated. Ukrainian electronic warfare teams had embedded Bovelu AD, Pol 21, and Nota X jammers in underground utility corridors, parking garages, and even abandoned metro tunnels. The result? Drones lost signal, artillery lost synchronization, and entire battalions lost direction. Into this fog, Ukrainian FPV drones screamed down from rooftops. One smashed into a tanned 90mm hatch, another plunged into a Russian coordination tent set up behind a shopping mall. Panic followed. Commanders shouted into dead radios. Vehicles reversed into each other. Supply trucks were hit before they could unload. Trying to regroup, Russian infantry moved to defensive positions only to find their fallback points already compromised. Storm drains hid special forces. Streets were mapped. Rooftops were weaponized. Lebanon was a lesson, but Moscow was a reckoning. The Russian formation west of Moscow had ceased to operate as a unified force. The command structure was shattered. Communications were gone. The streets told the story. 272 seconds abandoned with open hatches, Euro trucks reduced to charged skeletons, supply crates scattered like forgotten promises. What had once been a spearhead now resembled a graveyard of steel. Ukrainian infantry launched their final push from below and within. Emerging from storm drains, shattered basement, and shattered storefronts, they advanced not in waves, but in bursts. Small squads armed with suppressed rifles and law launchers and FPV drones. Launched by hand-cleared intersections and corridors with surgical speed. They didn't storm buildings, they sliced through them. In less than 2 hours, they reclaimed 4 city blocks and 2 major intersections. Russian troops, already starved of fuel, ammo, and orders, began to flee in small, disorganized groups. Some tried to hold positions. Others simply vanished into alleys or attempted to surrender radios dead. Supply lines broken, no orders coming. There were no grand battles, no last stands. Just a silent unraveling. In the heart of Moscow's western district, it wasn't firepower that turned the tide. It was precision, mobility, initiative. Every corner retaken was another artery severed. By the time Russian reinforcements were ordered forward, the roads were no longer open, and the city no longer waited. As the first light touched the rooftops of western Moscow, the battlefield lay still. Russian armored vehicles, once symbols of dominance, now sat burned and broken at every major intersection. The streets were scarred with craters and silence, an eerie stillness where chaos had roared only hours before. Ukraine hadn't just survived. It had turned the capital's outskirts into a trap and then into a reckoning. The assault collapsed not in a single battle, but through suffocation, drones, jammers, mines, stairwells, and silence. Lebanon marked the shift. But Moscow received the message. There were no trumpets, no announcements of victory, only scattered wreckage, empty helmets, and the slow reclaiming of ground once believed lost. What Russia thought would be a triumph through the gates of its own capital became something else entirely, a warning in steel, smoke, and digital ruin. BODs deepened the disruption. Their broadband jammers blacked out portions of the Russian command net, delaying orders and leaving frontline units to fight on stale coordinates. Drone feeds and encrypted text bursts kept Ukrainian battalion staff updated to the minute, letting them pivot fire missions and armor routes in near real time. The tempo became a trial of endurance as much as firepower. Fuel convoys threaded shell-scarred roads to keep the Leopards moving. Medics and combat engineers worked in tandem to clear rubble and ferry the wounded. By midday, the counterpunch had driven a wedge several miles wide through the contested belt. while emergency medical corridors proved that even in a fight measured in seconds and meters, human life remained a protected objective. The Avdiivka front had shifted again, this time under Ukrainian momentum, turning the night's punishment into the launchpad for a major operational gain. The surge of the counter-offensive ebbed by late evening, leaving both armies to regroup behind hastily fortified lines. Ukrainian units pulled back into a new perimeter about 3 meters beyond the old Avdiivka edge, stacking sand-filled barriers and wiring quick obstacles to secure the wedge gained during the day. Supply convoys rumbled in under blackout. Discipline unloading pallets,